Yeah, what's hilarious is that in the original version of the script, they said that that vampire was going to be called Blonde Death, and that Tarantino wanted Madonna to play the part.
That is a different take.
Yes, and I can say that today Selma Hayek looks the exact same that she did in 1996, and Madonna does not.
No.
Madonna looks different than she did.
No. Dick for gun. Gun for dick.
Shut up, adopted Asian son. You don't understand.
Two traps that started basically at the top of his head.
Exactly. And we're back. Hey, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hey. Woo. Woo. Welcome back to the Crowded Theater, everybody. And boy, do we have a good episode for you that actually features a crowded theater. I am Kyle Bogart.
I am Taylor Stewart.
And I am Cliff Bogart.
Fantastic, guys. Welcome back. How are you guys doing today?
So far, so well.
Excellent.
Not bad. The sun just came out, so
That's
it can't
right.
be a bad day.
It has been gray all day, so if the I'm sure to anyone watching the YouTube version of this, as usual, the light is going to go up and down. But we can't control the weather yet. But we're working on that. We would need sponsors first in order to be able to pull something like that off. But no, really cool screening. This, I think, to this episode, this screening is the kind of thing. This is why we created this podcast. Because a lot of people talk about movies as disembodied pieces of media, and they watch them on streaming or on DVD or whatever, and proud we are of all of them. But this podcast was founded to talk about really special, cool theatrical experiences, and we really had one of those this week. There has been a whole Panic at the Paramount series this October, a horror series at the big Paramount Theater, which, if you don't live in Austin, is a giant ornate theater downtown. Both in the Paramount Summer Movie Series and this month for their October Horror Series, Robert Rodriguez has been stopping by to host various screenings. I think we actually went to go see Romancing the Stone and Three Amigos there, which is a pretty rad screening.
It's a good double feature.
That's right. We went with our buddy Dave, and
I think y'all went to that screen. I think I might not.
No, you missed that one, unfortunately, so we could not do a podcast on it. But it was really fun, and I mean, as funny as Three Amigos or Romancing the Stone are normally, I mean, they really brought the house down with just a bunch of kids and a bunch of fun people there. But this screening was Robert Rodriguez hosting a screening of a film he directed, one of our favorite films from our childhood, written by Quentin Tarantino, coming right off of Pulp Fiction, From Dusk Till Dawn. From Dusk Till Dawn at the Paramount Theater, hosted by Robert Rodriguez with a Q&A by Greg Nicotero. That's pretty cool, isn't it, Cliff?
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, it's hard to imagine a better way to cap off October. Certainly for us personally, we grew up in the 90s, whereas Taylor was born the same year as this film, which is interesting, astrologically speaking. You were born in 1996. What was it like being born in 1996, Taylor?
The best opportunity, I feel. I feel like only the cool kids were born in 96. Everyone else is kind of chasing the clout.
Yeah, so we, as kind of an anthropological exercise here, we have someone who is the same age as the film print we watched last night. You and that film print were both struck in the same year.
Us, me, and that print.
That's right, printed. So that's the other kind of cool thing, is that it was very evident when the film started that it was on 35 and a really beautiful 35 millimeter print, and Robert Rodriguez revealed at the end that apparently this was his show print. That is to say, the print that was given to him, it was struck in 1995 or 1996 when the film came out, and that it had never been screened before. So this was a flawless virgin 35 millimeter print, so A, it looked really fucking good, and B, it was a weird like time capsule. It really was like opening up a time capsule and traveling back in time, and in more ways than one, because even Rodriguez, when he came out on stage at the end, because again, the Paramount Theater holds more than 1,000 people, so in terms of a crowded theater, there were 1,000 rabid fans, tattooed horror fans, film fans, just Austin people showing up to see it, and the energy was just wall-shaking, because it's From Dusk Till Dawn. It has a lot of big reaction moments. Heads come off.
And as a 30-year-old movie, or an almost 30-year-old movie, the special effects feel very modern. They are great special effects that absolutely still hold up to like a modern audience, obviously.
Well, that's what's nice about, I think we're in the middle of a moment where there's a resurgence in practical effects and a bunch of that kind of goo, especially, I mean, quite literally, and they talked about this in the Q&A. The Q&A also featured Greg Nicotero, who was in the film, who K&B Effects, helped bring about the film as sort of of a showpiece for their effects and stuff. And what was really interesting is at the time they were an aspiring effects studio. This film was supposed to be a showpiece for all the cool gooey things they could do. And now we've come full circle to the point where we've already gone all the way through CGI, come back, and now Greg Nicotero was directing 1 million episodes of The Walking Dead. And
we just had Beetlejuice come out and be a big hit, and that was the most remarkable thing about that movie is it was filled with practical effects, not a big CGI phantasmagoria actors on blue screens, which we have sadly become overused to.
Yeah, and in that way, I think that, had the film been made just a few years later and featured a bunch of I Am Legend weird CGI golems and been directed by, that guy who directed Constantine, I don't remember what his name is, Francis Lawrence or something like that, then
they were just at a point where CGI was expensive enough where they couldn't afford it in this movie.
Exactly.
A couple more years, you'd see it popping up in everything.
Exactly. And
remember American Werewolf in Paris?
Yes.
Just a couple of years later.
I recently rewatched American Werewolf in Paris, and, I'm not all much for messing with things, but some of those werewolves don't look great. But the movie around it is actually quite fun. But we will wait for someone to screen American Werewolf in Paris in a crowded theater at some point, and we'll talk about that. But it's actually a pretty cool movie. But just to kind of wrap up on the actual screening itself, and we can kind of get into the Q&A and everything later on. We were in a big ornate theater. We showed up late, as we are wont to do. We did not realize it would be sold out because we had seen some other things at the Paramount that were not sold out. So I
think being part of the AFS, or no, not the AFS,
the Austin Film Festival was going on.
It contributed to the amount of people going there for sure.
Yeah, something was going on. So we showed up and there was a line around the block. So we went to the box office, got tickets, and thankfully, when the guy asked us for tickets, we were just like, fucking stick us anywhere where we can get 3 seats together. And we ended up in the back of the balcony, which is great anyway, because I kind of dig the back of the balcony at the Paramount because you can see the very ornate ceiling and all of that, and they have a really loud sound system in the back anyway. But we ended up sitting between the 2 projector windows. I think there was 1 row behind us. So we had, in between us and the screen where this print was being played, we had 1,000 rabid fans as sort of energy generators, and you could just feel the waves of energy sort of hitting you, coming off of them from the screen, in rolls of laughter and reactions and all of that.
And speaking of energy, we saw the energy beams above our head. We saw that there was enough atmosphere in the theater.
Probably from people vaping inside
Yes, probably from people vaping, that we could very clearly see the beams of light coming from the projectors as we were sitting dead center. Yes. So one set of beams was to the right, one set of beams was to the left, which was really cool when it got to the sequence at the end with the disco ball, where it looked like the same kind of beams. But anyway.
No, I mean, that's exactly it. We were sat between there, so we could actually see as the different reels would change over, the beams would fire over our left shoulder and then fire over our right shoulder, and we could hear the changeovers behind us, and then the beams disappeared because the film goes from a daylight film, where you can clearly see these white beams of light cutting over our shoulders through all of the strawberry vape smoke or whatever the hell you people who were born in 1996 smoke all the time. What is it? Strawberry?
Watermelon
vapes? I don't know. But all the Zennials were providing a little bit of atmosphere so that we could see all these beams. And then when the film gets dark, the beams disappear because there's not enough light. But then when Juliette Lewis shoots that first hole in the wall and a shaft of light cuts through the atmosphere and fries the first vampire, from the back row of the Paramount, literally, you saw a shaft of light shoot from over our right shoulder, which is, I guess, where the projector, that was the reel that was playing at the time, and hit the screen and intersect with that light at a weird and perpendicular geometry. And that was pretty cool. That's something that I had never actually experienced in a theater before. And again, yeah, the level of, not only that, but just a strong theory that I have is the more people you have in a theater, the more energy. The more tightly packed people are, the more that energy radiates and amplifies. It's the same thing whether you're, in a tight concert or a club watching a heavy metal band or a punk rock band. It works the same if you're in a comedy club. And with 1,000 people in there, the film played, like it was brand new. It really felt like that 1996 print was sort of taking us back in time, and we could feel how kind of white hot and cool everyone was when this movie first came out. Or am I just making this shit up? Who knows? Cliff, Taylor, what was your experience?
No, I feel like I'll cut back to the first time I ever saw this movie. I was alone in my apartment watching it on a laptop, and
how did those two experiences compare?
Both the movie itself is so phenomenal that whether alone or with an audience, it really will take you away on its own trip. But I do highly recommend watching it with an audience because again, you just have that much more of an intense experience.
Yeah, so you'd seen it once on DVD and you enjoyed the film.
Yes, no, I totally had like a total. Again, most of the time I see movies, I go into it pretty blind, and this was especially so way previous to my relationship to Kyle, just alone in my room watching it on a laptop, and it completely took me away. And I was, as I've mentioned before, just off camera, the early on scene with Richie and the captive woman was very enriching or capturing for myself. Enrapturing. But like a car accident, you know something horrible is going to happen, but you can't quite look away, even such. And it very much leaves you with that unsettling feeling once it's over.
That is one funny thing about this movie, which obviously has contrast between the front half, which is a very serious crime movie, and the back half, which is a vampire movie. But yeah, it definitely grounds you in every kind of horror you can imagine. The kind of a realistic horror you're grounded in the first half.
Yes.
Completely different kind of horror than the kind of goofy, whatever. It's like goofy, supernatural, big K&B effects thing. It feels like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, like the very psychologically realistic, disturbing portrayals of serial killers. So you get that aspect, that horrific aspect in there for sure.
And that's the thing, is that one of the things to talk about is, and why we loved the film when we were young, why I think with the film, especially among filmmakers, gets talked about a lot, is because of and it's also one of the reasons the film had a hard time being produced, is it is an odd script. It is a very cool script. It is an odd script in that on the surface level, it is two different movies. It's a crime movie for the first half, following Seth and Richie Gecko, two bank robbers who have just recently fled prison, or that is to say Richie has busted Seth Gecko out, played by Quentin Tarantino and George Clooney. And then they kidnap a family, and they are on the road, and it is a fascinating movie that, not unlike, and I think Tarantino has referenced this before explicitly, a Stephen King story where you get kind of so invested in the characters that you don't that the horror almost gets in the way.
One of the luxuries you said, with a horror novel, where in a horror novel, since novels take a while to read and there's a lot more time to develop the characters, that you get a chance to actually get used to the characters and their lives it feels like the horror is interrupting that, and you rarely get that chance in a horror movie, because usually you're expecting, if it is a horror movie, the horror is going to spring out within the first 20-30 minutes, at the end of the first act at the latest, and that really doesn't give you enough time to explore the characters as much as you do, and even in Stephen
and I think
King
that's part of the things that it's just a film like this would normally, I think, if it were handed off to anyone else to make, or had been made in a time where the filmmakers did not have the clout to make something as eccentric as this, one could very easily see how the Gecko sequences with them in the beginning could have been compressed down to 15 minutes, so we would get by minute 15 to the titty twister, which was, I'm sure, what K&B Effects and all of those guys wanted in the first place. I'm sure that the film would have, if they did have the whole first half existing there, they would have added some horror element in, an opening sequence where someone's running from a vampire, or a mysterious vampiric figure that's following them at night and encouraging them to go to the titty twister, or anything to thread it in earlier and make the thing more one thing than two things.
They could have arrived at the bar and you hadn't known enough of their backstory, then we could have seen some of the scenes in flashbacks as it moved on. Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of the thing, is that all of those things would have made the film certainly more like other things, but wouldn't have made it as dynamic and as cool as it was, and as mind-blowing as it was. Because again, it's a huge risk and it's a huge roll of the dice, because you have to actually make something, if you're going to delay the horror that much, that actually works as a character story, that you actually want to follow, that you actually invest in as a crime story. And it actually does manage to pull that off really well, to the extent that not only is it working as just a kind of gripping genre story unto itself about these really bad bank robbers who all get set up, which we'll get to in a second, in this fantastic opening scene. These really bad guys who have kidnapped a really innocent family and what's going to happen. But it invests you in it in a way that gives a lot of depth and a lot of meaning ultimately to what's going to happen when they show up at Vampire Bar. It's ultimately going to give a lot of depth and meaning to what happens with both George Clooney's Seth Gecko and Harvey Keitel's Jacob, as they fight their way kind of towards redemption through all of that. And so it's that weird thing where it's, even as a kid, you know, it's a movie that's split in two, and yet it feels so sort of coherent and cohesive as a single idea, because I think it is working its way towards a single idea, this idea of kind of entering hell and redemption and all of that. But this screening started out, as any screening would start out, of From Dusk Till Dawn, with one of the best opening scenes of the 90s, one of the best opening scenes maybe of all time, I think. Quentin Tarantino's script opens with a scene that is brilliant on a lot of different levels. I'm of course talking about the liquor store scene at the beginning, the scene where the Gecko where I'll start earlier, where Michael Parks' Earl McGraw comes in and talks to John Hawkes' liquor store owner, who the name of the character escapes me. A pre-fame, a pre-Oscar nomination John Hawkes, fresh off of Austin's own Scary Movie, not the Wayans Scary Movie, but a different independent Austin movie, which Taylor and I saw in theaters not too long ago. Were you there for that screening? You were there. Okay, we all saw it. Cool. Maybe we'll do a podcast on that one day, perhaps. But anyway, so they have this opening sequence where Earl McGraw comes in and has all of this wonderful dialogue, wherein, not unlike, it's kind of like a microcosm of the whole film, in that everything is played so small. You have Earl McGraw coming in and just talking about getting food poisoning and this shitty day and all this, and John Hawkes underplays it so much. He's just, again, not a guy who's on a razor's edge because there's people being held hostage in the back. None of that. He is instead a guy who is just shooting the breeze. And by playing it that small, and by being a good actor, you know, in that, and I don't mean John Hawkes, I mean the character he's playing is a good actor. That's another feature in a lot of Quentin Tarantino movies, is everyone is a really good liar. And, you know, whether it's, at the end of, whether it's Hans Landa or it's Clarence in True Romance or whatever, it's always someone who's trying to get over some idea. And he is pulling it off in such a way that, you know, we actually kind of just start investing in the smallness of that dialogue and the smallness of the story. We actually start investing in the idea of Earl McGraw's life, and when eventually it tips over to plot and they start saying, hey, have you heard about this bank robbery and all this shootout? Well, it's the only thing that's been on the box all morning. It feels significant in that moment relative to that smallness, and then all of a sudden, the first monsters of the movie, the first horror, the first vampires come marching in the form of Seth Gecko and Richie Gecko, who march in already with two women held hostage. They're going to go shoot Michael Parks in the back of the head. And we have the two characters who we're invested in, and who, quite frankly, I would be comfortable watching a whole movie just about Michael Parks being a cool fucking guy hanging out in this small town. And then that world gets interrupted by two bloodthirsty criminals. And then it plays out from there. I remember us having a nice big reaction to that when we were young, Cliff. That was a pretty fantastic sequence, wasn't it? How did it play in the theater?
Well, in the theater, it was just amazing how, even in that opening conversation, how many of the, we've seen this movie a million times on DVD and stuff, how many of just the lines get big pops, big reactions from the audience who, not everyone there had seen it or was as familiar with it. So even just, funny lines from Michael Parks would get big laughs that you forget about as he talks about going to drain his lizard in the... in back and all that good stuff. So it was fun seeing it through the new eyes of this audience, and just how just how good the dialogue is and how fun it is. Just a fun way to open the movie, where you're just having fun hanging out with these guys. You could see a whole movie going off. They're both funny and an interesting dynamic going on. You're not sure about Earl McGraw. Maybe he'll be the racist cop who does something bad and compromise later and yada yada. You can picture a whole movie emerging from that. So that was definitely fun.
Yeah, no, it's cool. And then from there you have that fantastic action sequence where they shoot out the bottles behind them. And again, the other thing that makes this scene, again, it's a very, very, very well-written exploitation scene. It's a fantastic scene at the beginning of the movie. It's really cool, but what takes it to another level is the fact that you have, in an almost prophetic way, an embarrassment of great actors, and the fact that you have who then was only a local actor, John Hawkes, future Academy Award nominee, playing the guy behind the liquor counter store.
Really nailing the role.
Really nailing. What did you think of him when you saw him in the thing?
I think he really stole the show. Yeah. Like, I think that was I'm not surprised to learn that he later went on to go actually win awards and whatnot, because he really took away that whole scene.
He was always one of my favorite parts. I remember even before he became famous, watching this movie and thinking to myself, as an adolescent and aspiring to one day grow up to be a tiny Quentin Tarantino myself, I was just like, I don't know who that guy is, but I just want to find him and put him in movies. And then he ended up doing just fine on his own without my help. But you have John Hawkes, and then that is even not the biggest boon to the scene, or the biggest boon to the movie in terms of just weirdly prophetic casting. This is the very first film ever in a leading role of George Clooney, who would go on to become, pretty much from that instant, who had been a TV guy on ER, playing Dr. ER on ER for many, many years. Quentin Tarantino had actually directed an episode of ER and directed him in that, so they had worked together previously, but it was a TV star, and then in a flash gets cast in this. A couple years later, he is in the beloved classic Batman and Robin with bat nipples on full display. But he has basically been one of the perennial A-list stars for decades and decades and decades since then. But to think, prior to this moment, he was a TV star. So in this scene, not only do you have John Hawkes playing, the desperate man behind the counter, and you have Michael Parks in the scene, but you have George Clooney in maybe his very best screen role that he's ever will get the chance to play. Because, again, he's played a lot of great parts, and he's been in some fantastic, especially his work with the Coen brothers, and I'm a big Oh Brother Where Art Thou fan. But at the same time, all of those roles have a decency or a moral center, and even if they don't, like in you...
the Burn After Reading character doesn't quite have a moral center.
But he's a goof.
He is a goof. He is a bit of a goof.
That is true. And Cliff and I are big fans of Hail Caesar as well. So love that, but the thing is, he would not get the chance to play a character this dangerous, this amoral. And so you have this almost psychedelic experience of watching this brand new 35mm print of George Clooney looking down the barrel of the camera, which we experienced the other day, saying, if you make a sound, Mr. 44 makes a sound. If you run, I've got 6 little friends in here who can run a whole lot faster.
At that point, you believed it. He could have done that. He wasn't the nice guy.
Yes, he was not the nice guy. And quite frankly, he's bringing all of that movie star face and gravitas that we would all become accustomed to. Yes, it turns out George Clooney his big dumb head works very well on screen, and he's bringing all this to the brother of a sex offender robber guy at the beginning of this movie, so he's getting to do juicier things than he would get to do for the next 30 years of his career, and it's in his first leading role, and it's in this fucking scene in this movie. So again, the scene just has too much power. It's almost like a scene that good, the film couldn't hold up to its power and would just enter an energetic lull, but of course it doesn't, and it just keeps building and building and building. But to kind of get out from there as they're leaving this,
before we move on, I will say Quentin Tarantino, I feel like, because he did write the movie, not necessarily directed it, but he has a lot of stereotypes or a lot of associations. I feel like we should bring up one more. He sets a lot of people on fire in his movies. A lot of his scripts do have flamethrowers, blowtorches, alcohol meets what are they called? Russian
toilet paper with lighter fluid on it.
There you go. Or in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he torches Honora. He just burns the shit out of her in the pool. So yes, absolutely.
That's how John Hawkes makes his exit from this film, but he would recover with plastic surgery. He would later win an Academy Award.
That's right. He came back. I love the gag, and I love the detail after they do the full body burn. He comes over the counter, bang, 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 fires while on fire, and then crashes through a popcorn machine, and then his body causes the popcorn to pop, which is fantastic.
And then the two brothers just have a brotherly grumble as the whole...
as they walk outside, they have their argument.
One of the coolest ever moments of walking away from an explosion without reacting to it.
That's right. And as they drive away, we then see, to kind of get into it, and this kind of gets to the core of why I think the film works so well, and it can actually sustain its energy and hold off on the vampires until the midpoint of the movie, is as they're driving away, we get that wonderful insert shot of the terrified middle-aged woman as the final punchline to this whole sequence, that these guys who are kidnapping women and killing people and shooting Earl McGraw on the back of the head and doing all this other stuff, the whole time all this bullshit has been going on, there has been a terrified middle-aged woman kidnapped in the trunk of their car as they're driving down the highway. And it definitely communicates the idea that these are some rough customers, these fellas. And again, this is why I say George Clooney would never be allowed to touch anything like this. In fact, they said in the Q&A that the role was, they were thinking Mickey Rourke for the role, which is funny to think about, but he had retired from acting to pursue boxing very successfully. And that they had then switched, and this is worth bringing up for the Crowded Theater podcast, for the limited number of people who enjoy the video podcast. The next choice that Quentin Tarantino was thinking of and suggesting was Robert Blake, who has been watching over us like a saint from this Electroglide in blue poster behind us in all these episodes of the podcast. And Robert Blake, again, a guy, tough, Beretta. You could imagine him holding up a gun. It makes more sense in a movie that's this sleazy and this small to picture Robert Blake saying, if you make a sound, the gun makes a sound. If you run, I've got six, totally makes sense.
It's exactly what he said to his wife several years later.
Exactly. It's exactly what he said to his wife right before that. Yes, it says that for some reason I buy him. He's that committed. But you could imagine that. You could even imagine Mickey Rourke. But instead, George Clooney. No, George Clooney is supposed to be in a speedboat with Julia Roberts. That's where George Clooney is supposed to be. Or in some classy black and white thing, playing some guy who did something political and dumb or whatever. That's what George Clooney is supposed to be doing. He's not supposed to be in a scene like this. And again, part of what makes that work, I don't know, is that a lot of great actors and stuff. So let me tell you, I know that you were particularly affected by that. So we go out of that whole sequence, we come out of that into the kidnapped woman. And so I turn to you, Taylor. How did you like the kidnapped woman stuff?
That was probably the moment where you kind of realized the movie was the movie's getting real.
Yeah.
It was very... You couldn't quite put your finger on it because you knew something very unsettling was going to happen, especially with a Richie character of already kind of being the one that instigates the big shootout of the gas station scene.
You can tell that he's the loose cannon, and then all of a sudden George Clooney, who seems like the tough but fair professional criminal, leaves this terrified woman with the loose cannon Richie, and things get weird.
Yes, no, he's almost childlike. You wanna come watch a movie with me? And then also also preemptivate. It's even more unsettling because George Clooney has the whole monologue of you have 3 little rules. If you follow these 3 little rules, you'll be totally safe. And then you still feel unsettled, much like she probably feels very unsettled being left alone with this one. And then you come back to one of the best editings of a scene. I really am surprised we don't see this type of editing in more movies because it is so it works so well doing it. But just George Clooney or Seth comes back to see spoiler, the completely massacred body of this poor woman. But it is done so in millisecond jump cuts of his reaction looking at it, and then millisecond jump cuts of the carnage, which
single frame subliminal cuts. There's sometimes
subliminal cuts, yes.
Yeah.
And it is so good, so unnerving. And I will also throw out, there is a moment later on in the scene where you do kind of see off the corner of his side, like the scene over his shoulder. And as the morbid person who was watching it alone in their bedroom one time, the cut scenes are a much more aggressive, what you end up seeing long term. It's almost as if like it tones it down for the long, like it's a really interesting.
That's interesting. So it's almost like, very almost like surreal splatter images you're seeing for those single, those little subliminal cuts are great. I remember, and just wasn't a lot of stuff like that. Go ahead.
Just a cherry on top, the whole scene, whether it is a directional, like intentional thing direction wise, or just a pure coincidence, while those scenes are being intercut, George Clooney himself is almost twitching, like he himself is so overwhelmed, and so the combination of the twitching plus the jump cutting of the scene it's great. Together works really well.
I think it's a great, I think the editing kind of jumps off of the performance in a cool way. Those are the hallmarks that Robert Rodriguez came from an independent film background, is freaky editing, a hallmark of many Austin filmmakers, going all the way back to Tobe Hooper, but freaky editing and zooms, the poor man's two things for adding juice to your footage. I can just...
Don't cost nothing
to just add a couple more freaky cuts in there, and because things get very abstract in how the scenes are cut at the end of the movie, and zooms. And again, Earl McGraw and all these people, they get a nice little zoom occasionally, which that needs to come back. The cameras have become way too small and liberated. Now everyone's doing push-ins and all sorts of stuff. The zoom. Cameras need to make cameras heavy again, Cliff. That's what I'm saying. But anyway. So what were we talking about? Oh, yeah, it's interesting. Richie gets left with the kidnapped woman. She gets, taken. She gets,
raped and murdered.
Raped and murdered. There you go. And so Seth comes back. And again, it's not only does it dramatically change the energy from the first scene and in the liquor store, but again, it's kind of it sets up all of the kind. In a weird way, it kind of sets up everything that's ultimately going to happen in a macro scale in the movie to these characters, in the sense that, Richie himself clearly is a kind of vampire. Richie prays as soon as the door closes. He zeroes in on this woman, and we enter his POV.
He is a monster in every sense.
He is a blood-sucking monster that feeds on innocence and all of that. And it's again, it parallels how Selma Hayek sees him when she zeroes in on him later on in the film, when she shows up as the queen vampire, and he's the first one to die. He is kind of like this vampire. He is this monster, and yet we see that he is the monstrous aspect, the sins of his own brother, Seth Gecko, who fancies himself as this kind of professional thief. This is a theme that would recur throughout Reservoir Dogs. You see Harvey Keitel playing the professional thief, who's kind of an analog of the Richard Stark Parker character. You see this in Heat, with Robert De Niro's character, the guy who he's not the crazy wild guy. He's not Wayne Grove. He's not Mr. Blonde. He's not the guy who kills just for the sake of killing. He's the professional, and therefore he lives by a code or a moral compass that kind of puts him above those sorts of things. And yet, what we see in the dichotomy between these two scenes is George Clooney's character dealing with the monstrous reality of what he does. Because as much as he tells and he puts on this poor woman, who's actually played by Quentin Tarantino's acting teacher, which is funny. And because, again, not a titillating woman who's going to be in a half shirt, who's there to sort of abate the audience. Nothing like that. Just a terrified woman who doesn't want to be there. It makes you uncomfortable. Why? Because he puts all these rules on her. If you say something, I'll kill you. If you run, I've got 6 little friends that'll run faster.
Just be as polite and compliant as possible.
Exactly. But that idea that I'm a professional, so if you die, that's on you. And then, of course, when he comes back, as he says to Richie, she wouldn't have said shit if her mouth was full of it. She has just, of course, died innocently and for no reason. And as we learned from the Kelly Preston newsreel with the death counter and John fucking Saxon showing up, hell yeah, as the FBI agent, we needed more John Saxon. I always thought this, even when I was a kid.
He never popped back in. What was going on?
Yeah, apparently they just ran into him at a convention or something and put him in the movie for a minute, which is pretty sweet. But in all of that, you realize that he maintains this professionalism as this kind of moral code, and yet they're killing people. Like it shows a mother who died and was run over when they were escaping. There's a death count going. There's all the people who die completely needlessly inside of the liquor store just because Richie is this bloodthirsty psychopath. So everything that George Clooney is trying to deny that he is when he's slamming Richie's head against the side of the wall. I am not this. I am a professional. He secretly knows that he is. He is a vampire. He is someone who, even if he doesn't like to see it, he wants to. He basically survives by feeding on the deaths of innocent people. And so when we ultimately get into his journey, along with Jacob, the faithless preacher, into hell, into this bar, the Titty Twister, full of demons, where there's fire literally everywhere, and then there's even neon making the shape of fire because it's fucking hell. And even El Rey, the place they're ultimately going, I think, is a sort of a kind of hell analog from the book The Getaway and the movie The Getaway, the Steve McQueen movie, which also has its roots in Texas because it was shot in San Antonio, etc. But it's like, we're seeing the sins that he is going to have to literally do battle with when he enters hell. The sinful, vampiric aspect of himself that he can't let go of, which is Richie. He literally has to drive a stake through his brother's heart and then say, well, I've driven a stake through my brother's heart because he turned into a vampire, even though I don't believe in vampires, etc., etc. And then has to fight his way towards some kind of redemption, some kind of thing at the end of the movie. And this is what's important about this, is that none of that works if he's a kind of good guy. None of that works unless he's the kind of character who, in the opening scene, unless Richie really is that monstrous. By making them that monstrous and that bloodthirsty, and realizing that this isn't like George Clooney from like Out of Sight, this isn't like the kind of charming, but he's on the wrong, he's a bit crooked, he's on the wrong side of the law, George Clooney. This isn't that guy. This is a sinner who is tied to a much, 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 much worse sinner that is, this bloodthirsty aspect within him. And then what do we see? That aspect is now almost fractally played out in the larger film as we invest now, over the course of the next act, in the relationship between the Gecko brothers and the family that they're terrorizing, and the sort of bond between Jacob and Seth and all of that sort of deal that gets worked out. Before then, their little liquor store conversation gets interrupted by even bigger, scarier, more bloodthirsty things that are there to prey on bloodthirsty things. And that's, the cool kind of big fish, bigger fish structure, but that has an actual kind of moral arc to it, an arc towards redemption for the two main characters. And we haven't even started talking about Harvey Keitel yet, but I don't know. Taylor, am I wrong? Am I reading too much into it?
No, I think that so far... I'll never say you're reading too much into a movie. I feel like there's always more that you could read into every single movie.
You're damn straight.
Amen.
No, that's good. But it's a good transition into talking about Harvey Keitel and Juliette Lewis and the other kid who we never saw in another movie again, so I never learned his name, but adopted Asian son. And it's really interesting seeing that, because again, it's a journey into hell movie. So we have our monster, we have our sinner, Seth Gecko, and then we have our faithless preacher, Harvey Keitel, who, because the world is so cruel and he has lost his wife in a car accident, has lost his love for God, and now has to go into the belly of the beast in order to find these things, find this faith again, and even sequences that are not horror sequences, like the crossing of the border, and what could be more symbolically loaded about a crossing into hell than an actual crossing into the border, and is about a leap of faith, because he has this conversation with Seth where Seth is like, you have no reason to believe me, but if you do, let me get to the other side of this border, I will let your family go. And his son explains to him, no, I've seen the television shows, you're not supposed to do that, you're supposed to run. The television
shows not tell you not to believe a handshake.
Exactly. And so he just says no. He had looked into his eyes, and this is where it is an advantage to have George Clooney, because you're like, it's George Clooney, so it's like he's right to trust him. And it's also good to have Harvey Keitel, because it would be very easy for that character to come off as a scared or weak or frightened father, but instead, because it's Harvey Keitel, you're like, he knows what he's doing. Shut up, adopted Asian son, you don't understand. It's just, he's Harvey Keitel, he's got this. But he has to take this leap of faith, literally have faith that what he is, even though he has no evidence that it will be and no reason to believe it. And it's interesting because the border guard is played by Cheech Marin, who plays 3 roles over the course of the movie. He plays the border guard, and then he plays also the keeper of the threshold to the titty twister in the form of bearded Cheech Marin, the pussy guy, who says all the different kinds of pussy that they have. And he plays, again, the final threshold keeper, the guy who's going to take them to El Rey, or take George Clooney to El Rey, which we'll get to in a minute.
The one with the mustache.
Yes, the one with the mustache. The one where he finally assumes his full Cheech Marin form, just mustache and stuff. And in that way, it is interesting because he really does play the devil over the course of the movie. He is the one there to sort of adjudicate the faith of the family at the beginning and decide as they cross the first threshold into hell, which is the border. Then as they cross the second threshold into the titty twister, he again resists, tells them to go away, shoo, etc. And Seth and Richie literally kick the shit out of him just to get into the bar. So he's another threshold they have to cross so that they can then enter
through
this
violence.
Yes, exactly. Another
probably literally kick the shit out of him.
Yes.
Never checked his drawers.
That's right. He could have vampire pooped. We don't know. And then finally, at the end of the movie, he's the one who takes Seth to hell with him. But it is interesting to then think about how that initial kind of leap of faith of his character, again, the faithless preacher, he has the daughter, Juliette Lewis, who is great. How did you like Juliette Lewis in the movie, Taylor?
You know, she has a very unique face. Like, I feel like every time I see her, I would look at it and think I would have seen her in another movie or such. And
she was a big star in the 90s, yeah.
Nothing quite came to mind, but I'm glad that happened. She had a very unique face for an actress, and I thought that she had both you could tell that she was both a mature person, but also a very childlike face, like very good actress-wise.
She almost seems older and more mature than the character she's playing, than someone who would just be a daughter who's kind of along for the ride, and yet she kind of that also, I think, serves the movie by the time you get to the end of the movie, where she kind of is the sort of a little bit more hardened. She's one of the 2 survivors who kind of gets out of it with George Clooney at the end.
It makes you think she might run off with George Clooney. Exactly. I could see them running off to El Rey together. Maybe, just maybe.
Yes. And that's sort of the thing. And to kind of get to that for a second, that's one of those great moments where to sort of complete, before we get fully into Jacob and then to all the other things, that's one of those great things is that, you know, George Clooney's character, he ventures into hell the whole movie. He's venturing in because he knows that he is some sort of kind of damned figure, because he ultimately kills Richie. He finally faces this bloodthirsty aspect of himself, this aspect of himself that is not a professional, quote unquote, realizes what he is, realizes that the world would be made better by his absence from it, and so spends the last pieces of the movie trying to defend as best he can this family, or defend this thing, defend the faith, if you will. And then at the very end of the film, after they meet the final threshold keeper, you know, the final iteration of Marin 3, the Cheech Trismegistus,
Marin finale,
the thrice great Cheech Trismegistus. That's a great esoteric joke. Never mind. Anyway, the thrice great Cheech. When they meet him at the end, what I love, and this is one of the greatest setups of all time, is that the whole fucking movie, you know, as we've crossed these 3 Cheech thresholds into Mexico and then into the titty twister and now going on to El Rey, George Clooney has had this little tattoo sticking up out of his collar the whole time, okay? And this is the 90s. Tribal tattoos were huge. You have no idea. But
oh, I know.
Yes, but even when George Clooney is delivering his various monologues about vampires and about redemption and about fighting their way out and all of these things, he's set against all this neon that is done up in fire and all of this other kind of stuff, because again, they're venturing into hell. Juliette Lewis in that final scene asks to come with him. Hey, can I come with you, Seth? And he, at that exact moment, beautifully takes off his jacket and reveals that little bit of fire on his neck goes all the way down his arm, and that he is in fact marked for hell. He is, you know, like a scarlet letter, like a brand. He is of the titty twister. He always has been. He is going with Cheech Trismegistus, Trismegismus, doesn't matter, all the way to El Rey. You don't want to follow me. You still have a chance to go and be something else. And she goes off and does that. But I love that idea that, he ultimately does vanquish the vampiric aspect of himself. He vanquishes Richie, which is as painful as killing his own brother and killing part of himself. But that's not enough to save his soul. He knows he's damned, and he's just trying to do one last sort of redemptive act, desperate, stupid redemptive act. And that's something, again, that you see a lot even in Tarantino movies, is that, and it's something you see in Taxi Driver, is that is characters being saved or a heroic act being performed, not necessarily by a heroic person, but by a deeply flawed, deeply even evil character, but who, in one last desperate act of redemption or just for dumb dog-like motivations, does something good. Travis Bickle saves the girl. Ethan in The Searchers saves the girl. The wife-killing Brad Pitt saves everybody, including Sharon Tate at the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And again, all of Hateful Eight is just about a bunch of bad characters. But what I dig about it is that even all of that's not good. He could get into a Miata, put on some sunglasses, drink a beer, and then take off and be like, going to Mexico. But instead, the film kind of tells you unambiguously that he is damned and has to go on from there. And then that's not even the coolest part of the ending, Cliff. What happens right after that in the ending of the film? We haven't even gotten to the vampires yet, but I just want to touch on the ending here real quick.
Oh, yeah, the very, very end. The last shot is, of course, pulling away through the giant, see that the bar we've been in has been the top of a pyramid the whole time, yes, and a giant matte painting that is revealed. One of the last great matte paintings in cinema.
Yes.
Giant Aztec pyramid that has all sorts of bikes and trucks, the bikers and the truckers, all that detritus back there. Yes. It's an ancient evil that's been around for a long time, yes, that only now is disguising itself as the titty twister.
Yes. And what we dug, or what's really cool about Rodriguez talked at the screening about how originally the script, which I think was like a 2-week write or something originally by Quentin Tarantino, just had European vampires at some bar, and then a lot of the Mexican stuff got laid in as they were working on the movie, including the stuff with the big Mesoamerican pyramid at the end and all of that kind of stuff, or the big Aztec pyramid at the end, and that stuff I don't know, just explodes in the mind at the end. It just makes the film feel so much grander and cooler, because the whole film is peeling back layers on the titty twister the whole time. It's a bar, and then we realize, why do they only let truckers and bikers into the bar? That's why second Cheech stops them at the second threshold. They enter because, well, bikers and truckers are the kind of people who won't be missed, if they suddenly, and so that's why they're trying to kick them out, is because those are the kind of people who they would come looking for, blah, 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 blah. And so that idea that it's almost giving you, in this crazy film with all this nonsense going on, a sense of this as this kind of death factory, as this sort of ritual human sacrifice that has been going on since time immemorial, also it adds, quite frankly, to all of the biblical themes of the movie. The idea that this thing that you're seeing play out in the titty twister bar with these two criminals and this very 90s thing that's very contemporary and has a hard copy, a TV spot when we start the movie, is part of a kind of eternal, blood-soaked melodrama that goes on forever of sinners like Richie and like Seth Gecko, being drawn to this place and being, and then justice being served to them, and maybe a few of them get out alive, but only so their damned souls can continue on to El Rey, etc., etc., etc. And it just puts it within a whole context that is far more fascinating, especially in light of our Creature from the Black Lagoon conversation from last week, which was about how even now we're discovering the footprints of all these grand temples and everything in South America that have been lost to time and all of that kind of stuff. So again, think about something that's from the 90s from 1996, significantly more contemporary than Creature from the Black Lagoon, and yet it feels in that way that great movies do to only be accruing in its significance and great and sort of rising in its timeliness as time goes on and stuff. Because as we all know, there really were vampires in the jungle in South America.
We can only surmise.
Isn't that right, Taylor?
No,
Tell me I'm wrong. Prove me wrong.
Coincidentally, there is a very popular vampire book right now that is and I'm going to butcher because I haven't read the book myself yet, but it is African vampires. It is a vampire culture that is from Africa and has deep, long history, culture, etc. But the main draw for a lot of the readers or a lot of the people talking about it is that not only it's like a whole thing that all of the vampires are African Americans and all of their familiars are African and so on and so forth. It's all very cultural. Haven't had a chance to read it yet. Leave a review in the comments. But yeah, very much different cultures of vampires are very hip right now.
There's vampires everywhere.
Vampires everywhere. Well, it is just one of those ideas. Well, that's one of the cool things about it is that as much as we call this a vampire movie, the analogs that even the filmmakers were using, this will be our Evil Dead 2 was something that Rodriguez and Nicotero said that they were discussing before the movie. That even Rodriguez and Tarantino said that they were referring to it as a zombie movie in certain ways, and it is in the sense that most vampire movies certainly were about people slowly succumbing like consumption to vampirism and becoming pale over the course of films that would stretch out over days and weeks. And this is much more about a place being attacked by a horde, and if someone gets bitten by a thing, they become that thing. So the dynamics are very much that of a zombie movie with the vampires just sort of laid over the top of it. Which I remember, certainly as a Fangoria subscribed fucking 6th grader when this film came out, just the sheer quantity of effects and gags and ideas.
So many special effects.
And not just, and again, it's the special effects, and it's also just all the ideas behind the special effects, because you have, everything from ripping out a heart and sticking a pencil into it and then flipping over a table and dropping a person on each one of the 4
holy water spray bottles.
Yes, to say nothing of the weapons at the end and all of that. It's just so many fun ideas that, again, the whole titty twister becomes a sort of, again, a set piece that's just a box in which all of these monsters and gags and other things can take place. And I certainly,
and really, and not even just to beat a dead horse about it, but just also really amazing makeup. Once all of the different people do become vampires, their vampire versions are not like gimmick, and not to say bad thing about Twilight or whatever, but they're not just the same person, just a little prettier. Like they are each individually different versions of monsters. Like especially like the big hunkin' black guy at the middle just had his like face opens up. Like that was such a great image.
That's what's cool is that the Fred Williamson vampire looks different from the Tom Savini vampire, which looks different from the Harvey Keitel vampire. And they talked about this even in the Q&A afterwards. Greg Nicotero was talking about the fact that, I think it's just one of the things that gives the film such a crazy look is that they said they specifically were working against the reference of the sort of Buffy the Vampire Slayer vampire where everyone has the same little like furrowed brow, which again I remember Cliff and I making fun of, in like 1998. It's like, why do they have all of the same squishy butt right here on top of their head? They got the little squishy butt head right in between their eyebrows. And then they're a vampire.
Half Klingon.
Yes, exactly. And I know that, and I get it, like TV budgets, etc. But every vampire not only has a unique vampiric look that goes everything from the weird split bat faces on some people to weird, more impish vampires with pointy noses and pointy ears to just weird werewolf-looking vampires, but that gave them the ability to cater the makeups to the individual players. So they said that the Fred Williamson vampire was made to look like Fred Williamson as a vampire, and that the Tom Savini vampire was made to look like Tom Savini. And so everything has this sort of chaotic and organic feel that, even if you just lay the texture of CGI over enough things, they all sort of come out feeling fake and the same. And this is like everything being handmade. These things were not 3D printed. This was all handmade. It felt like such a world that was full, and that if you looked over the shoulder of this monster or this torso being cut in half, you could see a different monster. And a different torso being ripped in half in some unique way. I don't know. It just has a chaotic feel that's just I would say very few films have been able to capture in that way, like a Dead Alive or Evil Dead or something like that. That just has, it just feels like like an embarrassment of not just special effects, but just hilarious ideas that just keep building and building and building until, yes, you get to the end and they have cornered themselves in the in another great. I remember loving this as a kid. Yes, they kill truck drivers, so of course they would have a big room full of lots of shit for them to go and grab weapons. I love that idea. That's so much better than them improvising weapons from anything that wasn't.
MacGyvering a rubber band and a holly stake or whatever.
Yes, exactly. And so like a jackhammer and a fucking super soaker. And as a kid, that was when I still had super soakers. And by the way, that was talking about a leap of faith. That's the one leap of faith in the movie. They hadn't really tested that holy water thing before that kid. Well, that would be a hilarious turn of events if Asian adopted son just comes running out there and sprays them with holy water, doesn't work, and just eat his ass 10 seconds into the fucking thing.
He gives him 10 more minutes. I mean, he's doomed to be a meal at some point anyway.
Exactly. But he didn't get to live that much longer anyway. It may as well have been filled with regular water. No, I mean, again, it's just what else cool happened in the middle part?
I feel like
we skipped over all the vampires.
It goes to I'm about to bring up the big rat.
Selma Hayek. We should talk about.
We'll definitely be bringing up Selma Hayek in a second, but no, just on the topic of the special effects and special whatnots. What was the instigating event that caused Dick for Gun, Gun for Dick, to become a rat?
Oh, you mean Tom Savini?
Sex Machine.
How could you forget the name Sex Machine?
No. But what made
literally nothing other than they rip his head off with a whip. So they take his whip, wraps around his head, they rip his head off, and then once his head rips off, because I guess that's not good enough to kill a vampire, a rat head grows out of his head, and he becomes a giant rat. There's really no logic to it necessarily, and I kind of... That is almost the most Evil Dead-like thing in the whole movie, is that there's really no logic to a lot of what happens. Just crazy shit happening.
We assume Sex Machine was just such a powerful character that his vampire version would have all sorts of extra goodies, extra powers.
Yes, it all was derived from his dick gun.
Rat.
Yes,
Vamp
that's right.
rat.
His dick gun, his gun dick from Desperado, definitely did that. So I mean, again, the middle part of the movie, I mean, what is it? The final scenes with Jacob and all of them in the where they're kind of preparing their weapons and all that to kind of bust out at the end is good stuff. I always bothered me they didn't fight them in the hallway. I figure they could have really killed
strategically, we need to say, realistically, their best shot at taking on all those vampires was a hallway battle, just like the Battle of Thermopylae in 300.
Exactly.
Narrow a massive, overwhelming force into a narrow funnel, and the odds are evened.
Exactly, just like Leonidas said, that way they cannot use their numbers against you. But no, they bust out there and do all of that. But once you get past the killing of Richie and the everything in the middle, I don't know what Selma Hayek, that death. Everything that kind of is built around Richie's death, including him drinking liquor from Selma Hayek's toes.
The most egregious case of self-insert fanfic writing I've ever seen.
Yes, no, absolutely. But here's the thing, and I will make this case about that in general, which is I will make this case that it is interesting, because it's interesting to look at that scene as compared to the scene where Richie preys upon the woman in the hotel at the beginning. Mm-hmm. That, yes, Quentin Tarantino is writing towards his own fetishes, perhaps. Yes, he is writing a sleazy exploitation movie full of vampires. Yes, Selma Hayek is playing the sexy vampire chick coming out with a snake around her.
Sexual predator.
Doing a sexy striptease.
Oh, no, hey, so he did sexual assault, and now she is a sexual predator. Look at these.
That's what I'm saying, is that she zeroes in on him. Mm-hmm. He is the killer of women. He's probably, out of all the humans in the bar, the most evil, the most vampire-like.
Yep.
Everyone else is just people who wouldn't be missed because they're truckers, they're bikers, whatever. Seth is bad. Richie is worse. And so the first person that she zeroes in on, in the same predatory way that Richie zeroes in on the vulnerable woman before, is this evil figure. And we see that parallel. Not only does she kill him, rip his throat out, and that's the sort of inflection point of all of the atonement now that George Clooney is going to have to do over the course of the film as his brother now becomes a vampire, and he sees the kind of evil part of himself finally released and metastasized into something uncannily horrible, like Richie as a big-headed vampire with a giant jaw. So even the sucking liquor off of her toes as this insane snake woman and all of that is actually one of the most meaningful moments in the whole thing. And I think that's what is the uncanny genius, wherever it comes, of Quentin Tarantino, is that he can simultaneously, whether it's Pulp Fiction, and we could get into that on a different podcast at some point, or Hateful Eight, or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or Reservoir Dogs, he can write something that is on the surface wholly functional as sleazy exploitation or sexploitation or just sexy Salma Hayek pouring liquor down her leg into his own mouth, and yet make it truly the dramatic, thematic, and symbolic cornerstone of the whole movie. It's like her going after him. He is the first one to drink of her poison, the snake woman, and then he is the first one to get sat upon by the vampires. They literally stab his hand. You see the green venom, like snake venom, coming from the knife after he stabs the guy to death with the knife a second later. And it's his blood that's dripping then off of his hand when we enter Salma Hayek's POV. And now it's Salma Hayek who's seeing the world in slow motion in the way that he did when he was preying on Juliette Lewis and all of that. We're seeing the world the way she does. She seizes him, and then all of a sudden George Clooney is in this position of having to atone for all of his sins and fight his way out of all of that kind of stuff. So again, even the toe sucking is beautiful and meaningful, and I don't know, it's just, and it gets a big old clap out of the audience because, of boobs and stuff.
And before we move on from Salma Hayek, I would like to also point out that a little fun fact about the snake scene, or her snake dancing scene, because she herself was so squeamish and not a fan of that giant snake. They actually, what was it? They played it and they sped her up, or they slowed her down?
They said a couple things. He said at the Q&A, they shot it in slow motion so that they would extend the footage, but he also said that she claimed that she had gotten hypnotized prior to the scene.
She was so terrified of snakes, so she had to get hypnotized so as not to panic.
And Greg Nicotero said that she just couldn't even come near the snake when they first brought it. She was going to interact with it in rehearsals, so they literally had to have a conversation about whether or not the special effects team would be building a fake snake to do in the thing. But apparently, and I think there's probably also a certain magic to 250 people waiting for you to shoot this scene, and there's a camera and everything that sort of makes, it's like stage health that would suddenly make all of her fear dissipate. But they said that snake got on her, started crawling around. Rodriguez thought, okay, she's gonna freak out in about 10 seconds, but she was a trooper and she made it through, and fantastic.
It made one of the best scenes ever.
Yeah, what's hilarious is that in the original version of the script, they said that that vampire was going to be called Blonde Death, and that Tarantino wanted Madonna to play the part.
That is a different take.
Yes, and but you can also see immediately stripper dances with a snake. That's Madonna right there. And then he rewrote it as Satanico Pandemonium when they were making the whole thing a little bit more Mexican.
All right, when Robert Rodriguez wanted to put Salma Hayek in there, since he just worked with her in Desperado.
Yes, and I can say that today Salma Hayek looks the exact same that she did in 1996, and Madonna does not.
No.
Madonna looks different than she did.
Madonna.
She looks a little different than she did in 1996, but Salma Hayek hanging in there, fantastic. She is a vampire.
She is a vampire.
Maybe we're figuring all of this out. I don't know. Yeah. What else happened at this? So I'm trying to think. We've talked about a lot of the movie itself. I mean, again, we could talk about the fact that the print kind of took us back in time in the sense that the film, even Rodriguez, like I said before, said that this was the premiere that he wished he had in '96 because it really did kind of shake the walls in that place. And so I'm trying to think, was some other fun features of the screening. Did we mention that it was a double feature yet? I cannot recall.
I don't believe so. It was a double feature with...
Yes, that's right. So it was a surprise double feature, and so they said... and this is actually a really great second movie for a lot of reasons, because it also features Earl McGraw, the same character played by Michael Parks, and it features a lot of the same stuff. Special effects by Greg Nicotero, Quentin Tarantino playing a small role as a sex offender as well. Planet Terror. They played Planet Terror. Unfortunately, it was way past Taylor's bedtime. It was like 10:30 when the other movie ended. I was shortly
just about to approach pumpkin time.
Yeah, so we ended up having to bow out. But what was hilarious is that Robert Rodriguez noted that that Planet Terror had played 17 years prior in the same space, and that his son, who had been 6 years old at the time, was now going to see the film for the first time at 24 years old.
Wow.
In the theater and all of that. And what was especially remarkable about that is that Cliff and I were at that screening 17 years ago. We were at the Grindhouse premiere at the Paramount Theater, and so we did bow out because we had been there and done that. We had already seen Planet Terror there once, so we're not able to do it today. But man, what a wild thing to I vaguely remember that. I remember Death Proof playing. I remember reacting to all of that, and that was apparently when someone who was in the audience who was 24 years old was 6 years old. So isn't that crazy?
Wild.
Isn't that wild? So we saw, but Planet Terror is a really great, really fantastic. Now that I think about it, if you're going to watch Planet Terror in any context, watch From Dusk Till Dawn first.
Oh, yeah.
Because then it plays kind of like a fun after party to From Dusk Till Dawn.
The gang gets back together to have some more fun times.
Exactly. No, it was that was a cool thing. I'm trying to think if there's any other tidbits from that awesome Q&A they did afterwards. Anything that's unique that just hasn't been out there in the world. But no, it was a really cool experience overall. But there is one more thing, at least, that we must do before we move on, and that is, of course, to award the Full Metal Jacked Award to the most jacked character in From Dusk Till Dawn. I may know where you're going with this, Cliff, but we need to think about this. Who was the most jacked character? There's a couple solid options, but
there's a couple solid options, but really, if you're talking about pure, well, I don't know, there's a couple options. I'd say in pure visual jackness, you have the Danny Trejo vampire, of course, with the giant traps. That being the only major addition. The major addition beyond his face. 2 traps that started basically at the top of his head.
Exactly.
But I'll probably give it to Tom Savini.
Hell yeah.
Hanging in there as a probably at that point in his late 40s. He's jumping up on tables, doing his own stunts.
Yep.
Sex Machine.
Oh, really? Okay, I thought you were gonna go with.
Fred
Williamson is pretty jacked.
He's pretty jacked.
I think he's just naturally very big. Whereas Tom Savini was fit as hell. He had delt mass and arm mass and chest mass and all kinds of mass. By the way, and just want to say this, I still, as we have since we were kids, I'll follow Tom Savini anywhere, so I followed him on Instagram, and he was recently posting his 70th birthday photos or 72nd birthday photos.
Wild.
And he still takes a shirtless picture of himself, all jacked and shit, even at 70. So he still has got pec mass. He's not all fat and flabby. He's staying fucking fit. So again, I just want to let everyone know that vampires are real. You just have to do a little bit of fitness, and you too could look like Selma Hayek or Tom Savini. It's probably some good genes in there as well. So, and all of that. So, but anyway, yeah. So no, that does feel fitting. Tom Savini was the shit, and they did talk about the fact in the speaking of cool stuff from the Q&A, they were I just always assumed that he sort of came into it through his close association with K&B Effects, because he was the mentor to Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger and all of those guys on awesome films like Friday the 13th Part 4 and Invasion USA, Cliff, that they all worked on, which one day when someone that no one's ever going to play around here, Invasion USA in a theater. But if they do one day, Cliff, we are going to be there, and we're going to talk about it on this goddamn podcast. But anyway, But apparently, no, he just really he read the script, wanted to be part of it, and so did a full audition tape and everything, and auditioned for the part, and got Greg Nicotero to pass it off to Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, and that's fantastic, because as someone who grew up seeing him in Dawn of the Dead, and seeing
where he played a biker, one of the biker marauders in that.
Yeah, all of that. It's just cool to see him. It was cool to see him in a movie, and it was really our first exposure to him as an actor. I think almost certainly before Night of the Living Dead would have been in here, though we would have recognized him already, because he was like back then he was making TV appearances and all kinds of stuff as the special effects guy who showed how, he'd appear on David Letterman and show how people got stabbed and stuff like that. And so, I don't know. So it was just really cool seeing him in this movie, because when we were kids, it was our great aspiration that one day we would become special effects guys ourselves, and instead took a slightly different path. And it was a mistake, quite frankly. We should have become little Tom Savini's.
We're never that into arts and crafts.
That's true. I can't sculpt or draw, as it turns out, which is why I'm talking into this
That's
microphone.
not true. You're not going to be in any museum, but you have a very good artistic.
Thank you, baby. I appreciate it. I do appreciate it. But I remember that was a distinct memory of mine as a child, when I had to learn my own limitations, which is when I grew up watching the Thriller special features and over and over again, and desperate to one day grow up and be Rick Baker. And then I realized that all of those guys, James Cameron, Rick Baker, all those guys knew how to draw really, really well, and I couldn't draw very well at all. And so I had to let go of that dream and instead become a man of letters.
No, your writing is very good, but don't limit yourself in writing.
So thank you, baby. We can move
I'm here
on.
for
you. But anyway, so I guess that's basically it. So we have one more thing. Is there anything else I'm leaving out from our experience? A really fantastic experience, seeing this magical print, this time portal, if you will, From Dusk Till Dawn. Am I leaving anything out, guys?
I would just say, as my final thoughts on the movie overall would just be like, this is one of the best movies ever made. It really is. It's kind of a mixed pot, like a throw everything into the soup kind of a story, because it starts out with the crime story, it kind of throws in the religious family road trip-esque story, and then vampires all of a sudden. But it is just one of the best actors, stories, music, special effects, like everything you could want out of a movie.
What's beautiful about it is that the big risk that they take in allowing the film to sort of, on the surface at least, be two different movies pays off. And because it pays off, because big gambles pay off with big rewards, that aspect of it only serves to underscore everything that's amazing about it. Like if you had a little bit more connective tissue setting up the vampire shit to make it more of a vampire movie in the first part of the movie, then you wouldn't necessarily know whether or not the character shit in the beginning could support a whole movie unto itself. But they don't give you that, so you're forced to look for it, just like looking for meaning in those opening words between John Hawkes and Michael Parks. Search for the story within it. It forces us to search for the story and the characters in this movie, and there are vampires in that story. There are monsters. There are people who feed on the blood of the innocent. So when the vampires show up, yes, it does take a left turn and becomes a different movie, but because it succeeds at getting those ideas over, and it succeeds at making at finishing the story of those characters in the second half, the vampire half, because it is not two movies really, but in fact one movie, the fact that on the surface it's so bifurcated, it's so split, underscores how exquisitely everything is executed. Because if you don't tell this beautiful story of this bad guy on this quest of redemption who looks like George Clooney for some fucking reason, then you're not invested enough to, you're just waiting for the fucking vampires to show up. But you are, and it does anyway. So it really does. It works really fucking well. And if there were any doubt about that, or anyone who were to say, oh, I don't know, it feels a little disjointed, etc., then a screening like the one the other night would bitch slap them back into another dimension, because the Crowded Theater does not lie. The Crowded Theater reveals all, and that movie kills It holds the energy of the audience by the throat and makes them laugh and cackle and roll and howl. And right up until we pull back at the end and reveal that vampire pyramid, which is just like it did when I was a kid, but more so because we were experiencing it with 1,000 people at the same time. It just makes the mind boggle. It opens up the imagination, and so you have that effervescent feeling of leaving the theater thinking more, in a more titillating way about the movie you just saw than even seconds before. I don't know, it's a perfect movie experience and stuff. But we don't know the meanings. We can only speculate as to the deeper meanings of this film, which is why we have consulted with God in the form of, hold on to it for a second, babe. We have drawn a tarot card here. Thank you, babe. We've drawn a tarot card where I consulted the spirits as to what greater lessons our audience can take this week from Dusk Till Dawn into their lives. And so now we will reveal... The mystery is, okay, all right. It's the Seven of Swords, Cliff. Check that out. Seven of Swords.
Show the audience.
To show the audience. Seven of Swords. See, now the Seven of Swords is about strategy. It's about getting away with something in a sense, because as you see, there is a battle encampment behind the fellow, and he is stealing these swords. He has snuck in the night before, and he's taking the swords away. And as you see, it is a yellow card, which means it is a very positive card, something good that has happened. Some people associate this with deceit, in more divinatory readings. That is to say, there's some sort of liar or someone who is conniving, which would be very apropos of this film, which is all Quentin Tarantino movies is really about some person who is a great actor pulling off some sort of character on the stage of life, which is always a life or death stage of whether it's Tim Roth's character in Reservoir Dogs pulling off the lie of the Commode story and being this guy and whatever, or whether or not it's all of the Hateful Eight. It's always something like that. But with this movie, what I like about it is that it says, if you can actually get out ahead of the thing, you can pull off an uncanny or unpredictable victory that otherwise would not have been likely. And it was really interesting just hearing, and I'm drawing from an old memory on this, but the Tarantino and Rodriguez talking about how they had to strike while the iron was hot. They could have made in this moment where he was white hot from Pulp Fiction and Rodriguez was white hot from Desperado, from all that El Mariachi energy. They could have strategically planned for their careers in a more practical or conventional way, secured big projects, prestigious projects with lots of stars, things that would have garnered awards and been more conventional, and instead they opted to use this moment to make a film that otherwise would not have existed under any other circumstances and certainly wouldn't have existed in this raw of a form. And yet they made that movie. They made the exploitation movie that was meant to be a showcase just for heads getting ripped off and throats being bitten out, and they chose to make that movie. And therefore, they were able to make the best version of that movie, and therefore, they were able to make something that was an all-time movie because it was unlike anything else, which ultimately buoyed and, let us say, buttressed their careers and their reputations far more than if they had made something more conventional and generic at the time. And so I say this, Seven of Swords, to all of you people out there in the world, it's okay to strategize, to plan, to create a vision sometimes, to go a little bit outside of conventional wisdom and go for that other thing. So whatever your From Dusk Till Dawn is, make it happen. And knowing is half the battle. All right, I'm reaching here. But no, I like that. I think it's a good card for what we did here, and also it's a swords card, and this movie is very conceptual, so you got to go with that. Anyway, good stuff, everyone. That was a really I feel like the reason we did this podcast was to talk about really singular, fantastic screening experiences like this one. So I'm really glad we got the chance to record about this today. Anything else, guys?
This might be the best time of the movies we'll have on this Crowded Theater podcast. Let's hope some other movie can live up to it.
Currently, this sits at number 1. What will unseat it? Will it be unseated by Robert Zemeckis' Here? Ooh. Will it be unseated by I don't know what else. I literally don't know anything else that's coming out. Okay.
Well, now that we're leaving the Halloween, October spooky season, hopefully we'll see some sort of really nice holiday, Christmas-esque story coming up soon. Yeah. And if not, January is a whole new season of horror movies.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and hopefully we can do some Christmas movies as well. Okay, well, cool. Well, then I guess that's it, guys. Well, then, for the Crowded Theater, I am Kyle.
I'm Taylor.
I'm Cliff.
And we'll see you guys at the movies. Later, y'all. Woo!